You may be seated. Just a couple of quick things before we bring people in. One of the jurors from yesterday came back today. So it's Ms. Sanchez. Her juror number is 47. I'm going to bring her in and say, and she's not one of the ones we made a phone call to. She's one of the ones that we, I believe, said in court, come back Monday. But for whatever reason, I guess she was confused. Because I did have the jury office call everyone else that we had told to come back today, to come back Monday, and apparently no one else has come back. So, and then why don't we just go ahead and do this before we get the preliminaries out of the way. We've got some folks that didn't show up, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's go through who didn't show up.
On the first row would be 1, 2. Unless they're all in now, they were out there a few minutes ago. 1, 2, 3, 3.
3, 3.
5, 10. And 10, 2.
Well, we thought there were more people here than should have been based on what I did last night anyway, so maybe there was some mix-up. But in any event, we're going to proceed. Those people, if they're not here, they're not here. They'll obviously be struck. Let me deal with Ms. Sanchez first.
Okay. Do you want to question her, Judge, about the media room while she's here?
I can. Sure. It's fine. Why not? Just remind me that I've done it already on Monday. Honestly, no, I don't. I don't remember.
This is juror number 47 from yesterday's panel.
Okay. Ms. Sanchez, good morning. Counsel, you may be seated. I'm just going to have you stand right next to that microphone because we're not going to need you here today.
Okay.
You were here yesterday, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I am going to ask you one additional question before I let you go. But yesterday's folks are coming back on Monday at 9:30, not today. There's another group of folks I have to talk to.
Okay.
Can I ask this though? Were you part of the initial group I let go in the morning before we started the individual questions? Did you raise your hand?
Yes.
Okay, you
Yes.
were. Did you hang around? Did you just go ahead and leave?
You asked me to leave and come back today at 8:30.
Right, and you left, right?
And I left.
Okay, here's my question for you. At any time before you left, when you were out in the hallway, were you able to hear anything that was happening in here, like any individual
No,
question?
sir, I left. I didn't
You
even
just
stay.
took off like
Yes,
you
I
should
took
have. You
off.
just left. Okay.
Yes.
All right. I apologize that you came down today, but we're going to ask you just to come back on Monday at 9:30, okay?
Monday, okay.
Let me just remind you of things I told folks yesterday. You probably know them already. I just want to give you a little gentle reminder before I send you off. You cannot communicate with anyone about this case. You cannot do any research with respect to this case. And most importantly, you cannot listen to or read any news accounts of this trial, okay? And I know I told you that yesterday.
Yes.
I just like to remind folks every time I get the chance, okay?
All right.
Have a nice weekend. We'll see you on
Thank
Monday.
you. You too. All right.
We're ready. You mean to turn them off? Oh, yes. noticed they just showed up, yeah.
Judge, before I bring I just want to let you know 510 showed up and 10-2 showed up. So we're missing 2.
510 and 10-2 are here, okay. All right. So 1, 2, and 3, 3 are still missing in action. Yeah, if they don't get here where I get started, we're going to end up striking them. Sometimes they'll straggle in right at the end, but.
Jury entering.
All right, counsel, you may be seated. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Usually at this time I introduce myself, and I'm going to reintroduce myself because I believe I spoke to you yesterday down in the jury assembly room, but just by way of reintroduction, my name is Glenn Kelly. I'm one of the judges that serve Palm Beach County. I want to welcome you now up to courtroom 11 at H, which is the courtroom where you're currently seated. I did not get a chance to ask you one of my favorite questions yesterday because we were kind of rushing and I wanted to make sure that you did not have to sit around any longer than necessary, knowing that you had to come back today. But one of the questions I always ask folks when I start jury selection, I asked a group yesterday, I'm going to ask this group, who was excited when you got your jury summons? Laughter, but not a single hand. That's usually the response I get when I ask that question. This is particularly tough with a group that's already been here for a day and been asked to come back. So those of you that probably would have raised your hand yesterday are certainly not going to raise your hand today. And I do understand that. The response we got yesterday when we asked that question is we maybe got 3 or 4 hands raised out of a group of 100. We don't have quite 100 here this morning, but pretty close, and I got no hands raised. That's the usual response. The other question I always ask, though, I always follow that up by asking the question, who thinks it's important to defend the Constitution of the United States of America? Raise your hand. Okay, a few more hands on that one. Okay. Here's why I asked that question as a follow-up. I told you yesterday when I met with you briefly down in the jury assembly room that this is a criminal case. It's the case of State of Florida versus Dalia Dippolito. And any criminal case, a person accused of a crime has some very fundamental constitutional rights. Many of those rights we'll be discussing later, but the one right I want to bring to your attention now is the right to a jury trial in front of an impartial jury. Under the Bill of Rights to the U.S. Constitution, you have certain fundamental rights. One is a right to a public trial, a speedy trial, and you also have a right to a trial in front of an impartial jury. It's my job to make sure this is a public trial and to the best of my ability make sure it's a speedy trial. It's going to be your solemn duty and responsibility, at least some of you, to assure that we have a jury that's impartial and that can hear and consider this case, decide it based on the evidence as presented in the courtroom, the law that I instruct you on. So none of you are excited to be here. I know that. I know it's your second day here. But I do want you to understand, while not being excited about your jury service, how important your jury service is. Our system of justice depends on jurors. Without jurors, our system shuts down. Some cases we can do without judges. We can't do without jurors. Okay, so it's very important that you are here, ready, willing, and able to serve on a jury. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask you for your patience because, again, you've already been here one day, you're back a second day. Jury selection in this case is going to continue into Monday. Some of you will not be here on Monday. Some of you will not be here after today. And so we don't know who's coming back at this time and who's not coming back. I can tell you this, that the jury selection process in this case will go on all day today. Again, not all of you will be here all day today, but some of you will. Whether you're here for the shortest period of time or the longest period of time, please be patient with us. This is very, very important. It's important to the state of Florida. It's important to Dalia Dippolito, the defendant in this case. So I can just ask for your patience at this time. In a few moments, I'm going to do some additional introductions. I'm going to do some preliminary introductions at this time, and then in a few moments, I'm going to give the attorneys an opportunity to introduce themselves to you. I want to start. You've already met the deputy assigned to this courtroom. I know there's several deputies here, but Neil Cascone is the primary deputy assigned to my courtroom. You've already met him. He lined you up when you came in, I believe, this morning. A couple of things. He's going to be your liaison with the court, and so if you have a question, a comment, or a concern, you've not had an opportunity to speak to me here in open court, it is Deputy Cascone that you should see, and he will bring whatever you have told him to my attention. So he's the person that you should see. Also seated, I can't see her because the screen's on my way, Breanne Briggs, and you may not be able to see her either. You might be able to see her hand waving. She's the deputy clerk here with the 15th Judicial Circuit. She's going to be with us for the entire trial. It's her responsibility to assist the court with evidence, which means she's going to be swearing witnesses as they appear to testify in the trial. As exhibits or documents received, she'll be taking and keeping track of those documents. We also have a court reporter in the courtroom, Susan Catucci. She's sitting over here, typing away everything that is being said in this courtroom. She'll be with us for the entire trial. I'm going to ask you just a couple of things, favors to do on her behalf and also on my behalf, but obviously she's keeping the record in this case. Everything that I'm saying right now she's taking down. As we go through the day, everything that you may say to us in response to questions, anything the attorneys say is going to be taken down by her also. Because she has to take down your responses, if you would please at all times verbalize your response. There may be a tendency sometimes to nod your head, for example, to a yes or a no question. She can't take down a nod of the head. She has to have a verbalized response, a yes or a no. Also, she has to be able to hear you in order to take down what you've said. Also, I need to be able to hear you so that I know what you said in response to our questions. We have some microphones in the courtroom, but we're not going to be relying upon the microphones that you see around the courtroom. We do have a portable microphone that we're going to be passing around. What I'd like you to do is, number one, if you're asked a question, please use that microphone. And number two, you're going to see that we'll be speaking with different people, and sometimes it'll be orderly, maybe we're going down a row, sometimes it may be somebody raises their hand to a question and they're 3 or 4 rows back from you. If you have the microphone, if you would do me the favor, is just pay attention to who needs to get it, and if necessary, just pass the microphone back, forward, side to side, whatever the case may be. Otherwise, we have to have the deputy come collect the microphone, hand it to the next person. So if you can kind of assist, just like a baton, tossing it around the courtroom, that would be great. And please use it at all times so that obviously the court reporter and I and the attorneys can hear you. I've already given you a little bit of a preview yesterday as to what we're going to be doing here today, but I want to repeat what I told you yesterday so that it's clear what we're going to be handling today. Because we're really only going to be addressing today 2 issues. One issue that we're going to address is whether anyone here believes they know anything about this case. And in connection with that, I'm going to reread to you that statement of the facts that I read to you in the jury assembly room yesterday. And I'll explain to you the procedure that we're going to go through, finding out, number one, who knows or believes they know something about the case, and then secondly, what you do believe you do know about the case. And I'll explain that procedure in just a minute. The other thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be finding out whether there is some reason why you believe you cannot be here for this trial if you were in fact selected to be on this jury. Sometimes we describe that as the issue of hardship. Is there something that would prevent you from being here for the length of the trial if you're required to be here? And I'll explain to you a little bit more about hardship when we get there, and what is not hardship, and the analysis that I have to go through to make that determination. But those are the only 2 things that we're going to be doing here today. Now, sometimes we're going to be speaking to you as a group, as we are now. Likely there will be a time fairly soon where we're going to be breaking up into individual jury voir dire, which means we'll be speaking to certain of you individually, which means the people that we're not speaking to are going to be outside in the hallway waiting to come in. That's when your patience is really going to be important, because understand when we're speaking to people individually, we need to make sure that we've asked the questions that we need to ask, gotten the responses we need to get from those people before we get to the next person. We'll do everything possible to move that process along as quickly as possible. But please understand again, it does take time. And I wished I could tell you that jury selection was not tedious, but it is. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. It is tedious. It does take time. Sometimes you have no idea why we're even asking questions. And so I'm just going to ask you right up front, just be patient with us. We'll move through this as quickly as we possibly can. I want to cover some rules before we get into those 2 questions that I need to ask of you. Many of these rules I went over with you yesterday, but I want to repeat the rules again. These rules are extremely important, and violation of these rules has significant and serious consequences, both for the trial, and it could for you personally, but mostly for the trial. The first rule is, beginning now, and until I release you from jury service in this case, You cannot communicate with anyone concerning this case. Now, I realize at this point you do not know much about the case, other than the brief statement of facts I'm going to read to you again. We're not getting into the facts of the case during jury selection at this point, and so you may be wondering, well, what in the world could I discuss? Well, some of you, in fact, may have some knowledge about the case. We're going to find out about that. You can't go out and share that knowledge with other people. You can't discuss anything at all related to this case with anyone. And when I say discuss, that includes any form of communication. So it's obviously verbal communication. You can't go out in the hallway or somewhere else and discuss the case. It's written communication, and it's electronic communication. And so what that means is you cannot email someone about this case, Twitter, tweet, I don't know whether those are the same thing or not. I can't do either. Email, post on a blog, post on Facebook, all the different ways that we communicate these days with each other, the electronic manner of communication. It doesn't matter what form of communication it is, you cannot do it with respect to this case. I also mentioned yesterday, I'll repeat today, you cannot do any research with respect to this case. Again, realizing you do not know much about the case, you may be concerned about, well, what research could I do? Well, research includes things as simple as Googling someone's name. That is research. Looking up terms in a dictionary, or Googling a term in a dictionary that you've heard in court. That is research. You cannot do any research at all in connection with this case. That instruction begins now. Obviously, will continue through the trial, through the course of the trial, should you be selected for jury service in this case. It's important that you not do any research because jurors must hear and consider the same evidence, and that's only the relevant evidence that's presented here in this courtroom. It's that evidence and only that evidence that you can rely upon in reaching a verdict in this case. Very important instruction. Next instruction I gave you last night, I'm going to repeat to you now. You cannot listen to or read any news accounts of this trial, no matter where they may appear, whether it's on the internet, whether it's on television, whether it's in the printed press. You cannot listen to or read any news accounts of this trial. And I will tell you up front, there is going to be news coverage of this trial. So there are things that are going to be in the press, whether it be television, printed press, internet, or otherwise, that will appear relating to this case. And you cannot read anything, or view anything, or listen to anything related to this case. Those three instructions are critically important. If you were to violate any of those three instructions, it could cause us to start this entire process over again. Depending on where we're at, if, for example, the jury had been sworn, it could cause a mistrial. And you can see the process that's involved right now in selecting a jury in this case and how much time would be wasted if you caused us to start the case over because you violated one of these instructions. Now, I did mention last night, I believe, when I spoke to you yesterday afternoon, that this is not a request of the court. This is an order of the court. And because it's an order of the court, if you were to violate that order, I'm sorry, we have someone else joining us. If you were to violate that order, I could hold you in contempt of court. I think I told you yesterday, I've been doing this a while. I've never held a juror in contempt of court, never had to. I do not anticipate any problems in connection with this case. But it's that important, and I assume that each of you understand that and that you're going to comply with my directions with regard to those three matters. You're going to hear me repeat those three matters, or those three rules, probably almost every time we break. They're that important. I won't take as much time, but I'll say do not communicate, do not research, do not listen to or read news accounts of the trial, to remind you those are things that you cannot do. We are using a seating chart. You understand that you were lined up as you came in. That's because we're going to be trying to call you by name when we do speak to you. If you can remember, for the times that we have to come in as a group, please try to remember where you're seated, because if we do take a break and have to send all of you out and bring you back in, it's important that we get you in here as quickly as possible. If you can remember the row you're in and who you're seated next to, it's going to speed up the process. And I know everyone wants to speed the process up, so please do that. You may see the attorneys and the parties outside in the hallway on a break. I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you in just one moment, but if you happen to see them outside, please do not approach them. They have very strict instructions from me not to have any contact with you outside of this courtroom. And so if you come up to them, they're not even going to speak to you. And it's not because they're rude people. They're not. I've interacted with them. They're not rude people. Nice people. But I'm telling you, they're going to ignore you. And they're going to ignore you because they do not want to violate my order not to have any contact with you outside of the courtroom. So I think you can probably appreciate why that is important, all right? And so they may go as far, if you get on an elevator with them, they may get off the elevator. They're not technically required to. They're required just not to speak with you, but they may want to make sure that there's no issue here with respect to any communications between you and them. And so you get on an elevator, they may just hop off the elevator. So don't take it as, there's anything wrong with you. They are doing that, obviously, to preserve the integrity of the process. So if you're outside and you need something, as I said, see the deputy. See Deputy Cascone. If he's not there, there's a lot of they all dress the same. You can see they're all in green uniforms. Just find a deputy. Talk to a deputy. That deputy will answer your question. He'll give you directions. Also, you might see the attorneys working on their computers or looking at their cell phones. They're not checking out restaurants for tonight, okay? They have to coordinate witnesses. There's all kinds of work that is required in connection with the trial. And it's a very fluid process and it's ongoing. They're scheduling things and because we don't know exactly when we're going to start, there's a lot of things going on that they have to research and be looking at during the course of jury selection. So they're not playing games up here. Believe me, if they were, I could see them, and they're not, okay? They're doing work. So please don't think that they're ignoring you because they might happen to be on an electronic device. They are permitted to use those. We have an internet service in the courtroom they're permitted to use during the course of jury selection. So that's what they're doing. They're actually doing work, so don't think they're doing something else. I'm going to give the attorneys an opportunity to introduce themselves to you at this time, and then I'm going to start asking you a series kind of a do-you-know questions. We'll start with the state. Go ahead and you do your introductions.
Good morning. My name is Laura Burkhart-Lori. I'm here on behalf of the state of Florida.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Craig Williams. I'm Ms. Lori's sidekick for the trial.
For the defense.
Good morning, Greg Rosenfeld on behalf of Dalia Dippolito. Good morning, Brian Claypool, and I represent Dalia Dippolito as well. And seated to my right is my client, Dalia Dippolito.
Okay, thank you, counsel. The first question I'm going to have for the group, and as I said, there's going to be kind of a series of do-you-know questions before we get to those two questions that I do have for you today. First question I have is, does anyone know or recognize courtroom personnel that I've introduced to you, the attorneys, or Ms. Dippolito? Does anyone know or recognize anyone? Okay, we're going to start on the first row. Let me just do this. We'll go, since I have a number of hands raised, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go row by row and I'll ask that question. So the first person that knows someone is Mr. Goldfinger?
Yes.
Okay, and who do you know or recognize? Okay, don't tell me about that at this time. We'll come back to that. Okay, still on the first row. Who else raised their hand? Know or recognize somebody? Is that Miss Decembre? Did I get that close? Okay, who do you know or recognize? Okay, don't talk. Okay, you may have seen on the news. Okay, we're going to talk about that. Okay, all right. So that's the second question we have. Just right now, whether you know or recognize anyone. Ms. Davis. Okay, so you believe you know or recognize the defendant. That's fine. Still on the first row, Mr. Johansson. Who do you know? Okay. All right. On the first row still, Mr. Fredericks. Okay. On the still, Mr. Hayes. Who do you? No, I'm sorry. Mr. Hayes didn't raise his hands. It's Mr. White.
Yes, I recognize Steve.
Okay. You recognize Miss Lori?
Yes.
Do you know Mr. Williams?
No.
How do you know Miss Lori?
I was a reporter in a motion calendar at one of the floors during a criminal proceeding
You're a court reporter?
Yes.
Okay, and so obviously Ms. Laurie's a lawyer, she's in court, there are court reporters in court, you were in court, she was in court. Is there anything about the fact that you reported cases or hearings where Ms. Laurie was involved which would in any way impact your ability to be fair and impartial in this case? Okay. Is there someone else that would cause you to not be fair and impartial in this case? You know another lawyer in the courtroom?
Not that question.
Okay, I'll get back to you then. All right, I'll come back. So you know Miss Laurie, okay, but there's nothing about knowing Miss Laurie that's concerning you. Is that correct? Still on the first row, anyone know or recognize parties, lawyers? Ms. Taylor? Okay. Still on the first row is Miss Ivona? Ivanona. Okay, I'm sorry. Who do you know or recognize? Okay, thank you. We'll talk about that later. Okay, second row, anyone know or recognize parties, lawyers? Let me start down at this end. Is Ms. Logan? Okay. All right, still on the first. Yeah, we need to get that microphone. I'm sorry, I mentioned we were going to do that. We'll pass it on down. Who's the next person that knows or recognizes a lawyer or a party? All the way down here on the end?
I recognize the defendant.
Okay, and your name is?
Barsky.
Barsky, juror 27. I did mention this before. You may sometimes hear, as I call out your name, I may call out a number. You're not simply a number to us, but we do have a numbering system, and sometimes it's easier if I call out the number for the lawyers to immediately know who I'm speaking to, because I'm elevated and I still can't see all of you. They're on floor level, so they have even more trouble seeing you as they're sitting there. So I may call it a number, and again, you're not a number to us, but that's why I'm doing that. Okay, who's next that may know or recognize a party or a lawyer?
So this lady next to me speaks Spanish. She says she recognizes the defendant.
Okay, but so you have trouble, you do not speak English, ma'am? Is it Miss Nunez? Okay, all right, we'll come back to you on that too. Okay, and you're Mr. Mundell. Do you know or recognize someone?
Yes, I recognize the defendant.
Okay. Okay, anyone else on the, okay, and that's Mr. Kessner?
Yes.
Who do you know or recognize?
The defendant.
Okay. All right. On the third row, anyone know or recognize anyone? Let's see, where's the microphone? We'll just work it backwards then. Is it Mr. Erie?
Yes.
Juror 310, who do you know or recognize?
Defendant.
Okay. Who else on the third row knows or recognizes someone? Is that Ms. Graham?
Yes.
Who do you know or recognize?
The defendant.
Okay. Still on the third row, anyone else know or recognize anyone? Is that Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Who do you know or recognize?
Defendant.
Okay. Still on the third row, anyone else know or recognize anyone? And is that, is it Evans?
Yes.
Miss Evans. Who do you know or recognize?
The defendant.
Okay. Anyone else on the third row? We've got Mr. Hanford.
Yeah, I recognize the defendant, and I've seen their attorneys before.
Okay. All right. Anyone else on the third row before I move to the fourth row? Moving to the fourth row. Who on the fourth row knows or recognizes attorneys or parties? Anyone on the fourth row, pass the microphone on down, please. Oh, right there.
I have it.
Mr. Morgan?
The defendant only.
Okay. Still on the fourth row, who else would raise their hand on the fourth row? Is that Mr. Is it Botchner?
Botcher, yeah,
Botcher?
defendant as well.
Okay. Okay, still on the fourth row, is it Clark?
Yes.
Ms. Clark, who do you know or recognize?
The defendant.
Okay.
And actually, I've seen the attorneys as well.
Okay. Still on the fourth row, anyone know or recognize parties, lawyers?
I recognize the defendant.
And is this Ms. Blanco?
Yes.
Ms. Blanco, okay. Juror 48. Anyone else? And that's Ms. Palmieri?
Yes, I recognize the defendant.
Okay. Anyone else on the fourth row before we move on back to the fifth row? Okay, on the fifth row, who knows or recognizes lawyers, parties?
Yes, I recognize the defendant.
And your name is?
Kaplan.
Ms. Kaplan. All right, Ms. Kaplan. Juror 59. Anyone else on the fifth row?
The defendant.
Okay, I'm sorry, your name?
Trotta.
Trotta. Mr. Trotta, juror 58. You know or recognize the defendant. Who else on the fifth row? Handing it on down to, is it Mr. Youngblood?
Youngblood, yes.
Okay, Mr. Youngblood, who do you know or recognize?
I recognize the defendant.
Okay, thank you. Still on the fifth row? Is that Ms. Cohen?
Yes, sir.
Who do you know or recognize?
I recognize the defendant.
Okay, thank you very much. And seated right next to you, is it Pacheco?
Pacheco.
Pacheco.
I recognize the defendant.
Okay, thank you very much. Passing it over to, who else is on the fifth row? Is it Ms.
Adamski.
I'm sorry, the name again?
Adamski.
Adamski.
The defendant.
That's juror 5-2, thank you. Anyone else on the fifth row? Moving back to the sixth row, who on the sixth row knows or recognizes anyone? That would be Mr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Okay.
The defendant and the attorneys.
Okay, thank you. Still on the sixth row,
The defendant.
is that Ms. Sanchez, juror
Yes.
6-3? Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Sanchez? All right, who else on the sixth row?
The defendant?
Is that Mr. Westerfeld?
Yes, sir.
Okay, juror 6-4. And seated next to you, is it Ms. Gartel?
Yes. The
And
defendant.
juror 6-5, you recognize the defendant. Okay, who else on the sixth row? Is it Mr. Dalby?
No, Carlos Koenig.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, juror 6-8. All right, I didn't go
Okay, I
far enough.
recognize the defendant and her attorney.
Okay, thank you. So that's juror 6-8. Anyone else on the sixth row? And that is Ms. Goldfarb?
Yes, I recognize the defendant.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on the sixth row before we move to the seventh row? Moving to the seventh row, who on the seventh row? Is that Mr., help me out. Juror
Cook.
Highcook, okay. Actually, just like it's spelled, Highcook.
I recognize the defendant.
Okay, thank you. All right, who else on the seventh row? And is that Mr. Westfall?
Yes, the defendant and the attorneys.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on the seventh row? Is that Mr. Sayre?
Yes, it is.
Juror
I recognize the defendant.
7-8, okay. Anyone else on the seventh row? Is that Ms. Karwowski?
Yes,
And that's juror 7-7. Who do you know or recognize?
I recognize the defendant.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on the seventh row? Is that Mr. Cabral?
Yes, sir.
Juror 7-6. Who do you know or recognize?
Recognize the defendant.
Okay, thank you. Still on the seventh row, is it Ms. Roth?
Yes.
Who do you know or recognize?
The defendant.
Thank you. And next to Ms. Roth, is that Ms. Morales?
Yes, sir.
Okay, who do you know or recognize?
The defendant.
Okay. And still on the seventh row, anyone else know or recognize? Okay, is that, let's see, is that, help me out.
Georgiadis.
Georgiadis. Okay, Mr. Georgiadis, juror 7-3. Who do you recognize?
The defendant.
Okay, thank you. Still on the seventh row, anyone know or recognize anyone? Mr., is it Reed? Okay.
Yes.
Who do you know or recognize?
Defendant and one of the attorneys look very familiar.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Reed. And then, are we off the seventh row? We're on to the eighth row. Who on the eighth row? Okay, and your name is, help me out, Shannon?
Shahinian.
Shahinian, all right. And who do you know, ma'am?
The defendant.
Okay, thank you very much. Still on the eighth row, I've got a hand raised. Is that Ms. Seitz?
Yes.
Ms. Seitz, juror 8-3. Who do you know or recognize?
The defendant.
Okay. Still on the eighth row. Anyone else on the eighth row? Know or recognize anyone? Let's see, how far down are we? Is that Ms. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms.
Yes.
Duffy, juror 8-6. Who do you know or recognize?
The defendant.
All right, thank you very much. All right. Handing the microphone on down. Is it Ms. Taylor?
Yes.
Okay, who do you know or recognize?
The defendant.
Thank you. And then moving on down, is it Mr. Barrett?
Yes, I recognize the defendant.
Okay, thank you very much. Juror 8-9.
Juror 8-10.
Okay, so you guys are getting the numbering system, aren't you? It's pretty easy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 7 and 10 rows back. So it's Ms. Marvel?
Yes.
Okay, juror 8-10.
I recognize the defendant.
Thank you very much. Ninth row.
910, Mercado. Recognize defendant.
Thank you very much. Still on the ninth row. Mr. Dottie?
Mr. Doty.
Or Doty, okay.
I know the defendant.
All right, juror 9-9, okay. And is it Augustinelli?
Yes, I recognize the defendant and one of the attorneys.
Okay, and that's juror 9-8. Okay, who else on that ninth row? Is it Mr. Tragona?
Yes,
Okay, and that's juror 9-7. Who do you know or recognize?
the defendant.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so on the ninth row, anyone else know or recognize any of the parties, attorneys?
Juror 9-2, I recognize the defendant.
That's Mr. Grunwald?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
9-1 Cooper, the defendant.
Mr. Cooper, juror 9-1. By the way, you have no idea how much easier it makes when you call out those numbers, when you're trying to follow things, so I appreciate that. Are we done with the ninth row? Okay, that doesn't mean you all have to do it. I'm just saying it's helpful. 10th row. Anyone on the 10th row? Let's see, is that
Pamela Johansson.
Pamela, okay, got it. Juror 10-2, okay.
I recognize the defendant.
Okay, anyone else on the 10th row?
10-4, Olson. I recognize the defendant, the lawyer.
Ms. Olson, you recognize the defendant. Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else on the 10th row? We've got Ms. is it Martinez, 10-6?
10-5,
Oh, 10-5.
James Dvorsny.
Dvorsny, okay.
I recognize the defendant.
All right. Anyone else? That's it, okay. Little different question for you. Did any of you know or recognize each other before you came into the courtroom? Did you, like a coworker, a friend, anyone like that? I got a couple of hands raised. Can we get a mic? We'll start in the front and kind of work our way back. I think on the 4th row, where's the first hand raised? I see that knows. Okay, and your name, ma'am?
Tiffany German.
Tiffany German, and you should be on the 4th row. Okay, and who do you know?
I know Dr. Barsky.
Barsky. Okay, where's Barsky? Right up here. Okay. And you're a 2-7. Okay, and how do you know Mr. Barsky? You're 2-7. Yeah, you're 7.
Sorry.
We got your name anyway, so it's okay. How do you know Mr. Barsky?
We work at the same locations.
Okay. So you work together or just at the same location?
Well, some nights we probably work together, but we have 2 separate locations, but the same business.
Okay, what do you do?
Pediatric associates. I'm the front office manager.
Okay, and did you say, is it Dr. Barsky?
I'm a pediatrician.
Okay, so it's Dr. Barsky. Okay. All right. So here's my question. I'm going to ask Ms. German first, then I'm going to ask Dr. Barsky. It's possible you could both end up on the jury together, and if that happened, you'd have to consider the views of all jurors in reaching a verdict. My question is, are you going to give Dr. Barsky's views on the evidence? Now, we're not dealing with pediatrics, obviously, but on the evidence, are you going to give his views on the evidence in this case any more or less consideration than you would any other juror, simply by virtue of the fact that you work around him?
No.
Okay. And Dr. Barsky, I'm going to ask you the same question with respect to Ms. German. Could end up on the jury together, have to decide and consider this case, and you'd have to consider the views of all jurors. Are you going to give Ms. German's views on the evidence any more or less consideration simply by virtue of the fact that you know her?
No.
Okay. I think I saw a couple other hands as people that knew someone, and that's in the front. We've got Ms. Davis. Ms. Davis. Yeah, Ms. Davis, who do you know?
Nina Gartell.
Ms. Gartell. Where's Ms. Gartell? She's in the back there. She's juror 6-5. Okay. How do you know Ms. Gartell?
We're cousins.
Your cousins, okay. All right. Well, you've heard the questions I've asked. You could end up on this jury with your cousin, Ms. Gartell. If that happened, you would have to consider the views of all jurors and weigh those views and reach a verdict. Would you give Ms. Gartell's views on the evidence any more or less consideration than the other jurors simply by virtue of the fact that you're related? Or no? No. Okay. Ms. Gartell, I'm going to be asking you the same question, so if we could just pass the microphone back to Ms. Gartell. First of all, I assume you do agree you are cousins with Ms. Davis.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we got that established. Okay.
Yes.
You could end up on the jury with Ms. Davis, and if you did that, you would have to decide the case and consider the views of all jurors. Would you give her views on the evidence any more or less consideration simply by virtue of the fact that
Probably.
you probably would? Okay. So Ms. Davis won't, but you may. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you might give her views a little additional weight because you know her.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else know or recognize anyone, a potential juror? Okay, right. Let's pass it forward right up here. I think we're 4 rows back. Is that Ms. Palmieri?
Yes.
Who do you know, Ms. Palmieri?
I know 2 people, actually. I know Peter Miller.
Mr. Miller. Where's Mr. Miller? He's way in the back there. Let's see. Mr. Miller's juror 9-5. And who else do you know?
And I know Gladys Medina Prada.
Medina Prada. So that's right. She's juror 5-10. Is that right? So you know her. How do you know Ms. Prada?
She, at one time, was my cleaning woman.
Okay. Anything about the fact, you could end up on the jury together, and you'd have to consider the views of all jurors. Anything about the fact that she worked with you, which in any way would cause you to give her views on the evidence any more or less consideration than anyone else?
No.
Okay, and how about Mr. Miller? How do you know Mr. Miller?
I work at the country club where he lives.
Okay. And again, ending up on the jury with Mr. Miller, would you give his views any more or less consideration than any other juror?
I don't think so.
Okay. And then if you could pass the mic back to Ms. Prada, juror 510. You obviously know Ms. Palmieri, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You know the question I'm going to ask you. You could end up on the jury together. Would you give her views on the evidence any more or less consideration than any other juror simply by virtue of the fact that you worked with her?
I don't understand what you said now.
Okay. Are you having trouble understanding me?
No, I understand, but not complete now because I know Mrs. Palmieri because I work for housekeeper.
And the question is, if you ended up on the jury with her, when you went back in order, you'd have to discuss the case with all the jurors, not now, but you'd be permitted to once you were back there deciding the case. If you went back there and she was on the jury with you, would you give her views, her opinions, any more or less consideration than anyone else, simply by the fact you used to work for her?
No.
Okay, thank you. And then if we could pass the microphone back to Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller, do you likewise know Ms. Palmieri?
I do.
Okay. Well, you know where the question's coming from. You may end up on the jury with Ms. Palmieri. We don't know at this point, but if you did, you'd have to go back, decide this case, considering the views of all jurors. Would you give her views on the evidence any more or less consideration, simply by virtue of the fact that you knew her?
I don't believe I would.
Okay. Did anyone else know or recognize anyone? We got a hand up right next to, is that Mr. Hopp?
Correct.
Who on the panel do you know or recognize?
My neighbor on the left, 9-7.
Oh, right next to you.
Right next to me.
Your neighbors in all things. Okay, so that's Mr. Tragona?
Correct.
Okay, so you guys are neighbors. All right.
No. He's my neighbor here. We used to work together.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood that. Joke's not quite as good now. All right. So you used to work together?
Yes.
All right. Is there anything about the fact, again, you've heard the question, you could end up on the jury with Mr. Tragona, you used to work together, end up on the jury with him, you got to go back, consider the views of all jurors. Would you give his views on the evidence any more or less consideration than any other juror? Okay. And if you can hand the mic to Mr. Tragona. Mr. Tragona, you obviously know Ms. Hopp, is that correct?
Yes. I also know Mrs. Renee Duffy, who's sitting right in front of me here, and right in front of me as well.
Ms. Duffy, okay, I'll speak about Ms. Duffy in just a moment. Is there anything about the fact if you ended up on the jury with Mr. Hopt and you had to consider the views of all jurors, would you give his views on the evidence any more or less consideration simply by virtue of the fact you knew him?
No.
Okay, and you also know Ms. Duffy. How do you know Ms. Duffy?
I used to work with her husband a long time ago.
Okay, same question with respect to Ms. Duffy. If you ended up on the jury with Ms. Duffy, would you give her views on the evidence any more or less consideration simply by virtue of the fact that you know her?
No, we're not.
Okay, Ms. Duffy, if we can pass the microphone to Ms. Duffy. You know Mr. Tragona, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Same question for you. If you end up on the panel with Mr. Tragona, you're going to give his views on the evidence any more or less consideration simply by virtue of the fact you know him?
No, sir.
Okay. Did I miss anyone? Okay. I have had a husband and wife come together before, which is really unusual. All right. Okay. All right. With those preliminary things done, what we need to do is get to the two questions that I was discussing with you before. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the procedure that we're going to follow for answering this first question. In just a moment, I'm going to reread to you that brief statement of the facts that I read you last night. I read it last night to give you some context to know what you cannot look at on the news, and I want to make sure you understood that, so that's why I read it to you last night. I'm reading it to you for a different purpose today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the statement of the facts again to you, and then I'm going to ask each of you, and I will go row by row, who believes, based on that statement of the facts or for any other reason, that you know something about this case, that you know or recognize this case. Now, what you're going to do, if you do believe you know or recognize something about this case, you're not going to tell me at this time what you think you know. What you're going to do is you're going to raise your hand. I'm going to identify you. And then at a later time, we are going to speak with you individually about the extent of your knowledge. So do not blurt out what you think you know. All you're going to do at this point is tell me that you believe that you know something about this case. And so we're going to follow the same procedure I just did. I know it's a little bit tedious. I have to go row by row, but let me read the statement to you first. And then I'm going to, again, ask if anyone knows or believes they know anything about this case. All right, the statement is as follows. In the summer of 2009, the defendant, Ms. Dalia Dippolito, was accused of hiring a person to kill her then-husband, Michael Dippolito. The person she allegedly hired turned out to be an undercover Boynton Beach police officer. Ms. Dippolito denies any intent to kill her husband. Reports relating to this case have appeared in the local and national media, including the television show Cops. So I'm going to tell you right now about the case, and what I want to do is I'll start in the first row, and all I need to know, and we'll just go through just like we did on knowledge before, who in the first row believes that they know something about the case. Go ahead and raise your hand until I acknowledge you. So it would be Mr. Goldfinger, is that correct? Give you Ms. Decembre again, correct. Ms. Davis, Mr. Johansson, let's see, Fredericks, Mr. Fredericks, yes, Mr. Fredericks, Mr. Hayes, Mr. White, Ms. Taylor, and Ms. Ivanova. That's juror 110. Okay, thank you. Miss anyone in the first row? Going to the second row, same question. Anyone believes that they know anything about this case at this time? We'll start down here. Where's the microphone? Actually, I don't even need the microphone. I'll just call out the names if I get them right. It's juror 2-1, Ms. Logan. Is that correct? Okay. Did I see Ms. Long's hand up also? Juror 2-2, Ms. Long. What's the next hand I see? You can raise them up just a little higher so I can see. Is it Dr. Barsky? And Mr. Bundell, juror 2-9. And again, juror 2-10, Mr. Kessner. Okay. All right, if we can move back to the third row. If you recognize, that's juror 3-2, Mr. Hanford. And is it juror Miss Evans? Juror 3-4, Miss Evans. And is it Miss Branson?
Yes.
And next to Miss Branson is Miss Lewis.
Yes.
Juror 3-7, and is it Miss Graham? Juror 3-8, and on the very end, juror 3-10, Mr. Erie. Okay. Now we will go to the fourth row. Who on the fourth row believes they know something about the case? That's Mr. Morgan, is that correct? Juror 4-1. And if I get your name wrong, because I miss where you're at, please shout out your name so I don't miss anything. Miss German, is that correct? Juror 4-4. Juror 4-5, Mr. Botcher. Next to him, 4-6, Ms. Clark. And again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing names also. Juror 4-8, Ms. Blanco, is that right?
Yes.
Juror 4-9, Ms. Palmieri. Okay. Now if we can move back to the fifth row, and I'll start over on this end. On the fifth row, it's, is that Mr. Sanchez? And Ms. Adamski, Ms. Juror 5-2, is that right?
Yes.
And next to her, Juror 5-3, Pacheco. And Juror 5-4, Ms. Cohen.
Yes.
And then next to Ms. Cohen, Mr. Youngblood.
Yes.
Juror 5-5. Then what's the next hand on the fifth row? Is it down to, let's see, is it Kaplan? Ms. Kaplan, 5-8. Trotta?
Yes.
Oh, Mr. Trotta. And then Ms. Kaplan, juror 5-9. Is that right?
Yes.
Ms. Kaplan. Okay. Miss anyone on that row? Okay. Going to the sixth row. Who on the sixth row believes they know something about the case? We're going to start with juror 6-1, Drodowski. Okay, I'm sorry for that mispronunciation. Juror 6-2, Kennedy. Juror 6-3, Sanchez. Is that right?
Yes.
Sanchez. And juror 6-4, Mr. Westervelt. Okay. And then next to that would be juror 6-5, Cartel. And on over, is it 6-7, Miss Dalby? Miss Dalby? Dalby, I'm sorry. Still on that row, we have Mr. Koenig.
Yes.
Juror 6-8, and we have, is it Goldfarb? It's Goldfarb? And Juror 6-10, Semper. Is that right? Semper, okay. Now going to the 7th row. If you could raise hands on the 7th row. Yeah, raise them up real high. Let's see, it's Ms. Bachman. Mr. Reed, is that right?
Yes.
Juror 7-2. Juror 7-3, Jorganis. Okay, I'll probably get that wrong again. I apologize. Mr. Morales, Juror 7-4. Yes. Juror 7-5, Ms. Ross. Yes. Juror 7-6, Mr. Cabral.
Yes.
Juror 7-7, Kowalski.
Yes.
Ms. Kowalski. And Juror 7-8, Sayre.
Yes.
Juror 7-9, Westerfall.
Westfall, yes.
Yes. And Juror 7-10, is that right? Pukuk. I'm getting it wrong even though I'm looking right at it. Okay, thank you. It's Juror 7-10. 8th row. Ms. Shanahan, 8-1. And next to you is that Ms. Harrell, Juror 8-2. And next door, 8-3, Ms. Seitz, is that correct? Okay. Juror 8-4, is your hand up? I'm sorry? Yes, Ms. Volp, 8-4. And let's see, who's the next hand? Is it Ms. Duffy? Did I miss someone in between, Ms. Duffy? Yes. Mr. Graham? Yes. Okay, Mr. Graham, Juror 8-5. Ms. Duffy, 8-6. Is it Ms. Taylor? Yes. And Mr. Barrett, Juror 8-9.
Yes.
And Ms. Marvel, Juror 8-10. Okay. Going to the 9th row, we've got Mr. Cooper, Juror 9-1. Mr. Grunwald, Juror 9-2. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then we have, is that Juror 9-4, Mr. Lampen? Okay. And let's see, is it Mr. Miller, Juror 9-5 also? Mr. Miller? Okay. And skipping one over, is it Mr. Trigona?
Yes.
And Juror 9-8, Mr. Agostinelli?
Yes.
And Juror 9-9, Mr. Doty?
Doty.
Doty, I'm sorry, I mispronounced it twice, didn't I? Mr. Doty. And Juror 9-10, Mr. Bricado?
Correct.
Okay. And then on the 10th row, who do we have on the 10th row? Let's see, it's really hard to see back there. Is Ms. Olson? No? I'm sorry?
That's it.
10-6.
That's it.
10-2. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear back there. Johansson. Okay. And 10-4 Olson.
10-5.
And 10-5 Dvorsny. And 10-6 Mr. Martinez. Okay. All right. All right. Now the next question I have for you relates to the issue of hardship in the case. And what that deals with is your ability to serve on this jury if you are in fact selected. And what I need to tell you is the length of the trial, or the anticipated length of the trial. As I've already told you, jury selection is going to continue on Monday. We're hopeful of getting a jury on Monday. After the jury is selected, the attorneys believe it's going to take 5 or 6 days to try the case. And so what that would mean is if you were selected for jury service in this case, you'd obviously be here all next week. And the following week, Monday, Tuesday, maybe at the latest Wednesday, but you would be going into the following week, Monday, Tuesday, perhaps Wednesday of the following week, so all next week, and then perhaps Monday, Tuesday, outside chance of Wednesday the following week. So that's the length of time that you'd be required to serve if you're selected for jury service in this case. So let me talk to you about what people sometimes describe as hardship, which is basically folks telling me I can't be here. That's what hardship is about. That's what they tell me, I can't be here. And so we describe that as hardship. Few things to understand about hardship. Number one, it's already a hardship you're here. And so if I just excused you because you didn't want to be here, we wouldn't be trying too many cases because none of you raised your hand about being excited to get that jury summons. So that's obviously not the standard. Now, the legal standard is extreme inconvenience. It really has to set you apart. It has to be something that is extreme enough that I can't compel you to be here for jury service, which means some things you have to set aside and you have to be here. So let me talk to you about the typical things that come up when I have this conversation about hardship. One thing that comes up a lot of times is employment. So let me talk to you a little bit about employment. Number one, an employer is not permitted to discriminate against you in any way because you're serving on a jury. That's against Florida law. They are not permitted to take any type of retaliatory action against you by virtue of the fact that you're serving on a jury. They're not required to pay you. We do not dictate payment policies of employers. So they're not required to pay you, but they cannot take any type of retaliatory conduct against you because you're on a jury. With employment, sometimes I'll hear people tell me, well, it's our busy time of year and it's going to really be hard on my employer if I'm not there. That's a hardship for your employer, but I'm not permitted to let you go for hardships on your employer. It has to be a personal hardship. So the fact that your boss is going to miss you is not a basis for me letting you go, okay? Your boss is going to have to deal with it, all right? It has to be a personal hardship before I can relieve you from jury service. Many times appointments come up. I've got an appointment for this or I have an appointment for that. It's going to depend upon the nature of the appointment, all right? If you have an appointment, routine appointment at the dentist for a cleaning, you can reschedule that appointment. Let me use an extreme example. You got a trip to the oncologist planned. I'm not making you miss that, okay? So, I mean, there's all kinds of appointments, but it's going to be a matter of what is the nature of the appointment? Can it be rescheduled reasonably? Because it is going to be, you're going to have to give up a little bit if you serve on the jury. So there is some give and take here, and we will ask you whether you can reschedule. Another thing that comes up a lot of times is child care. Normally the issue here becomes picking up children or taking children to school. That comes up quite often. Usually when you're serving on a jury, the problem is not taking children to school or to daycare in the morning, because this is a bit of an exception. We usually don't start at 8:30 in the morning because I have hearings in other cases typically at 8:30 in the morning. Most mornings, if you're selected for jury service, you won't have to be here any earlier than 9:30. Monday's going to be an exception for those that come back because we're trying to get the jury selected. But most times I'm going to have a morning docket. I will not be able to get started with you before about 9:30. So most of the time folks are able to take their children to school in the morning. Where it becomes more of an issue is in the afternoon, and people will tell me I need to pick up my child at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, whatever the case may be. That's fine if you want to talk to me about that, but be prepared for me to ask you whether or not there is someone who could assist you for a few days while you're here in jury service to pick up your child, a spouse, a friend, a neighbor, anyone that could help out for just a little while for a few days while you're here on jury service. So if that's an issue, I'm going to be asking those types of follow-up questions. In fact, really anything that is an inconvenience in that way that might be able to be assisted by someone else, I'll probably be following up and asking, is there somebody that can help you out with this so you can be here for jury service if you're required. Just a couple more things I want to tell you about hardships. Travel, again, sometimes travel comes up. It just depends upon the nature of the travel and what plans you've made, whether tickets have been paid for, that type of thing. And so travel is an issue I have to consider on a case-by-case basis if you think there's an issue. A couple of last things I'll tell you. Number one, the decision about whether to release you for a hardship is my decision and my decision alone. Now, why do I tell you that the buck stops with me? The reason I tell you that is you might tell me you have a hardship, and the lawyers might agree with you. You might say, Judge, you really ought to let that person go for hardship. And I decide I don't believe legally it's a hardship. They don't get a say in it. It's all my decision. So what that means is if for some reason you ask for a hardship and I deny it, the person you need to be angry with is me. Not the lawyers, not the parties, and you should never hold it against them. You can say things about me under your breath if you wish, but do not take it out on the lawyers of the parties, because it wouldn't be fair, because they don't get a choice. They don't get to say, it's my call, buck stops with me. Also, please understand, when I'm making these types of decisions on hardship, it's a bit of a balancing test that I have to go through. Example I always use here. Teachers often will tell me that they're concerned about their students because they're going to be away, even though there'll be a substitute, but it may be testing time. There are a lot of reasons why they're concerned about their students. When they tell me that, I believe them. I believe that they are genuinely concerned about their students. Here's the problem, though. If you work for the Palm Beach County School Board, there will be a substitute in your classroom. I'm not saying the substitute is the same as you in that classroom. I'm just saying there will be a substitute, and you are paid for your time on jury service. So I have a teacher who may be legitimately concerned about their students, but they're getting paid. They have somebody in the classroom, and then I have someone who's been out of work for 6 months. They don't get paid. They just got a new job. They don't get paid. They're in danger of, not paying the rent or whatever the case may be. And I'm balancing those types of hardships when I make these decisions. So please understand, there is a balancing act, and also understand, as I said, buck stops with me. All right, I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible, because I know it's tedious going row by row, but I need to do this again. First row, anyone that needs to speak to me about a hardship. Anyone on the first row thinks they have a hardship, that's juror 1-1, Mr. Goldfinger, and it's, is it Mr. Hayes? No, I'm sorry, Mr. White. I keep getting Mr. Hayes and Mr. White mixed up. Mr. White, and then Mr., is it juror 1-9, Kennedy? Or Kidney, I'm sorry, Kidney. Anyone else on the first row? Going back to the second row, anyone who believes on the second row they need to speak about hardship, it's Ms. Long, is that correct? Okay, and then is it Ms. Jean or Colby? Colby. Ms. Colby. And next to Ms. Colby, Ms. Parker. And then next to Ms. Parker, we've got Dr. Barsky. And then on down, we have juror 2-9, Mr. Bundell, and juror 2-10, Mr. Kestner. Is that correct? Okay. All right. Who on the third row needs to speak to me about hardship? Let me just start on this side so I don't get mixed up. It's juror 3-2, Mr. Hanford. Is that Ms. Evans? Juror 3-4, Ms. Evans. And who else on this row? Is it Ms. Orlick? Juror 3-9, Ms. Orlick. Get everybody on hardship on the third row. All right, going to the fourth row, who needs to speak to me about hardship? It's Mr. Morgan. Is it Mr. Botcher? Yes. Okay. And next there is Ms. Clark, juror 4-6. And then Mr. Campo. Is that juror 4-7? And then Ms. Palmieri again. And on the very end, Mr. Amazi. Okay, juror 4-10. All right. And then moving back to the fifth row. On the fifth row, I've got Mr. Sanchez. Is that correct? And is it Ms. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Cohen. And then next to Ms. Cohen is Mr. Youngblood. And then on down, is it Ms. Kaplan? Yes. Okay, that done with the fifth row. Okay, going to the sixth row. I'll just start here and work my way over on the sixth row. Semper, juror 6-10. Goldfarb, juror 6-9. Juror 6-8, Kunik. And then 2 over, is it Miller? Yes. Ms. Miller. And then Ms. Gartell, juror 6-5, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, anyone else on the sixth row that I've not spoken with or not acknowledged? All right, moving back to the seventh row. On the seventh row, let's see, I've got, is it juror 7-3, Georgiadis? Is it Ms. Roth? Is that correct, Ms. Roth? Juror 7-6, Mr. Cabral? Yes. And juror 7-7, Karwowski? Yes. Okay. Did I miss anyone on the seventh row? Okay. Moving back to the eighth row. I think I'll just work my way this way. Is it Ms. Marvel?
Moore, I'm Moore.
Oh, I haven't gotten there yet. I was starting on this end. Is it Miss Marvel 810, right? I'm going to move over. I've got Miss Taylor. Is that right? And then I have Mr. Moore. Got it, Mr. Moore, 87. And then all the way over, I have Miss 82 Harrell. Okay, moving back to the 9th row. On the 9th row, I've got Mr. Cooper. And that is it Lampton? Juror 94. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but and then all the way down, I've got Mr. Agostinelli, juror 98, and Mr. Brancato, juror 910. Okay, on the 10th row. On the 10th row, I'll just work my way back this way. It's Mr. Dvorsny, juror 105. And who else we got? Is it Miss Olson? And then all the way down we got, is it Jorensu? Juror 10-2? No, Wilson. Oh, I'm sorry, Wilson. You start the beginning of the row there. Okay, I'm sorry. That's the hardest row to see back there, and it's also a shorter row. So Miss Wilson, 10-1. Okay. Okay, juror 110. I'll be happy to add you to that list. Okay. All right. Did I miss anyone? Okay. All right. Now here's what I'm going to do. With respect to the issue of knowledge and with respect to the issue of hardship, we're going to be speaking to you individually about that. But there are some of you at this point who have not raised your hand to either question, which means that you've said to me, you do not believe you know anything about the case, and you do not need to speak to me at this time about a hardship. And so I'm going to call out those names to make sure I have confirmed that you do not need to tell me about something you think you might know about the case or an issue of hardship. And when I release the group, you're going to be released for the day. And you're not going to have to come back until 9:30 on Monday. So the people I'm going to call out in just a minute. And what I'd like you to do, if I call out your name and I'm incorrect, that either you think you know something about the case or you actually did have a hardship and I missed you, then you tell me. But when I call out these folks, these are the folks so far who have not told me anything that we need to speak about here today, either knowledge or hardship. Ms. Lori, do you have something? You keep looking back.
I do.
Sure. Okay, apologize for that delay. Now, if I call out your name right now, when we take our break, you can go ahead and go. and come back Monday at 9:30. You're not going to have to hang around while I do the individual interviews. But just a reminder for those folks that are going to be leaving us here in a few moments, the three things I told you, the three rules that I told you: no communication about the case, no research about the case, and importantly, do not listen to or read any news accounts of the trial. So if I'm letting you go at this time, please keep those things in mind. Here's the other thing, just as a matter of procedure. When I call your name, don't get up and leave. What we're going to do is I'm just telling you, because then it's going to be mass confusion. You guys are going to be leaving from the middle row, and it's like getting out of a movie theater. What we're going to do is I'm going to call these names to confirm these are the folks that don't have to hang around. Then we're going to take a break. Everyone else is going to go outside, and I'm going to start the process of individual interviews. Let me give you a little heads up. What I might do, because I wish there was a way that I could speed up the individual interviews. I really can't, so you're going to spend some time out there. But what I may do, and I'll talk to the lawyers and I'll talk to the deputy before I do this, we have a pretty good idea of the pace that we're going to be going at, and so it may be some of you folks in the back rows, I may tell the deputy, starting at row, I don't know that this is true, so don't take it for now, say row 5 back. We may say, you guys don't have to hang around right now, you can come back after lunch. So we may make that decision, and so not everyone is waiting around outside for the entire period of time. Now, regardless of what group you're in, whether you're hanging around to have questions asked and you're sent to lunch early, wherever you're at, whether you're sent home early right now because you haven't raised your hand to either one of these questions, please keep in mind those rules and instructions I gave you. I won't repeat them again. You're getting tired of hearing them. You got it. But do not violate any of those rules or instructions, no matter what group you fall into. But right now, let me just call these names out to make sure that we're all on the same page. And there are a couple people that didn't raise their hands. When I get to you, I'm going to ask you to hang around because I want to talk to you for just one moment, even though you didn't raise your hand. So these are the people right now who've not raised their hand to either question. And lawyers, check me out, obviously, make sure my notes are accurate with your notes. I'm going to call out these names, and these people, once we take our break, are free to go home, come back 9:30 on Monday. On the second row, I've got Juror 2-3, Ms. Is it Van Dyne? Did not raise your hand to either question. Juror 2-4, Jean, you're okay to come back on Monday. On the third row, I believe it's Ms. Keller. Okay, so you do have something you want to speak to me about? Okay, well, I'm going to put you on the list to speak to people then, okay? So you'll need to hang around then. Okay, Juror 3-3 did not come back, so we don't have Juror 3-3. Still on the third row, Mr. Pierce is good, didn't raise his hand to either question, does not need to be here any longer. On the fourth row, Whittam, Ms. Whittam, did not raise hand to either one, so you're going to be free to go here in just a minute. Juror 4-3, Ms. Arelis, okay, you did not raise your hand either, so you're going to be free to go here in just a moment. Moving to the fifth row, Ms. Hughes, I believe, did not raise your hand to either one, so you should be free to go here in a moment. Next to you, Mr. Sellers, did not raise your hand to either question, so in a moment you'll be released. I don't think I have anyone on the sixth row, no one on the seventh.